Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. The tires crunched softly on the gravel path, a sound almost swallowed by the immense quiet of the surrounding woods. I'd been driving for what felt like an eternity, each mile further unraveling the tight knot of city-induced tension in my shoulders. The house under the trees, as the cryptic rental listing had called it, was my chosen hermitage for the next few months. Even the air here felt different, thick with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and an underlying ancient stillness that hummed just beneath the threshold of hearing. A silent promise of solitude that I desperately craved these days. My first glimpse of the house sent a small, unexpected shiver down my spine, a curious blend of awe and a faint, almost primal, apprehension. It wasn't just under the trees. It was among them, an organic structure of dark, weathered wood and moss-kissed stone, with massive, gnarled trunks seeming to pierce the verandas and support the low-slung roofline. Windows, like shadowy eyes, peered out from beneath heavy eaves, reflecting the dense canopy above. It looked less like a building and more like a natural outgrowth of the forest itself, ancient and secretive. Stepping out of the car, the air was cooler than I anticipated, carrying the subtle, metallic tang that often precedes rain. The trees, mostly ancient oaks and what looked like towering cedars, formed a dense ceiling, their leaves already whispering secrets to a wind I couldn't yet feel on my skin. I unlocked the heavy oak door, the sound of the tumblers echoing unnaturally loud in the profound silence. Inside, it was dim. The light filtered green and gold through the leaves, dust motes dancing in the sparse shafts that penetrated the gloom, carrying the scent of old wood and something else, something uniquely earthy. I spent the first hour just wandering, my footsteps echoing on the wide plank floors. The interior was a labyrinth of oddly shaped rooms, dictated by the placement of the supporting trees, their bark sometimes exposed within the walls. It was rustic, certainly, but held a strange, undeniable charm, a sense of being held within, something vast and alive. As I ran a hand over a cool, moss-flecked stone hearth in the main living area, I felt the first tentative drop of rain on the back of my neck, having fallen through a small gap in the leaves far above, and then the chimney. Almost immediately, or so it seemed, a soft patter began on the roof and the dense foliage outside, a gentle drumming that slowly enveloped the house. With it came that faint, unfamiliar scent I'd noticed earlier, stronger now, like damp soil after a long drought, but with a hint of something almost floral, yet indefinably wild. I paused, listening to the rain's soft symphony, and for a fleeting second, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shadow detach itself from the deeper gloom of the hallway, a flicker of movement too quick to register properly. I blinked, shaking my head slightly, attributing the fleeting shadow to a trick of the strange, aqueous light filtering through the leafy canopy and the rain-streaked windows. The house was old, and my mind, tired from the journey, was likely playing games. Yet, the image lingered, a brief darker silhouette against the already dim passage, too defined for a simple play of light. The rain picked up slightly, its rhythm a constant, soft drumming on the roof, and a gentle hissing through the leaves, creating a cocoon of sound around the solitary house, making the world outside feel distant and blurred. Deciding to unpack later, I continued my exploration, drawn towards a large window at the far end of what seemed to be a study. Bookshelves, mostly bare, lined one wall, and a sturdy, scarred wooden desk sat before the window, overlooking a part of the woods where the trees grew particularly dense. As I stood there, mesmerized by the swirling patterns of raindrops on the glass, I heard it. A distinct, soft sigh that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the room, like someone breathing out slowly. It was different from the wind, more personal, more present. Startled, I spun around, my heart thumping a little faster. The room was empty. Just the scent of old paper, damp wood, and the ever-present rain. Just the house settling, I murmured, to myself, though the excuse felt thin. It was then, through the rain-lashed window, that I saw him. A man, tall and lean, clad in dark, weatherproof clothing, was standing near the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by the trunk of a massive oak. He wasn't looking at the woods, but directly at the house, at my window, his stillness unsettling against the backdrop of the falling rain. He raised a hand, not in a wave, but more like an acknowledgement, then began to walk towards the house with a slow, deliberate gait. I moved to the front door, a sense of unease prickling my skin. He introduced himself as Mr. Hemlock, the groundskeeper, his voice a low rumble, much like the distant thunder I was only now beginning to register. His eyes, the color of wet slate, held a strange mixture of courtesy and an unnervingly keen scrutiny as he explained he was just checking if I'd arrived safely, given the weather. The old place has a way of making its presence known, especially when the rains come, he said, a cryptic half-smile playing on his lips. His gaze drifted past me into the shadowy depths of the house, lingering for a moment before returning to meet mine. I thanked him, assuring him I was fine, but his words, coupled with his watchful demeanor, left a residue of discomfort. The rain seemed to fall a little heavier as he departed, melting back into the dripping trees as silently as he had appeared. His parting words, making its presence known, echoed in my mind long after Mr. Hemlock had vanished back into the deluge. The house no longer felt like an empty vessel awaiting my presence, but rather a silent, watchful entity, its secrets stirred by the falling rain. The initial charm of its unique architecture was now subtly underscored by a feeling of deep, ingrained mystery. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the encompassing trees, now seemed to carry a potential unspoken meaning, a language I didn't yet understand but was beginning to feel. I shook off the unease with a conscious effort, deciding that a warm drink and the mundane task of unpacking might dispel the shadows, both literal and imagined. The kitchen, though old-fashioned with its deep porcelain sink and aged wooden counters, was surprisingly well equipped. As I waited for the kettle to whistle, the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane seemed to grow more insistent, each drop a tiny hammer tapping against the glass, a constant reminder of the world outside, and perhaps of something wanting to come in or be acknowledged. It was while I was putting away some books on a built-in shelf in the living area, a dark alcove partially shaded by the thick leaves of a branch that grew close to the window, that my fingers brushed against, something cold and metallic tucked deep at the back. I pulled it out. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, heart-shaped and surprisingly heavy for its size. It wasn't dusty, but rather damp to the touch, as if it had recently been exposed to moisture, though the shelf itself was dry. There were no visible clasps to open it. A strange chill traced its way down my arm as I held the locket in my palm. It felt incongruous here, not like a forgotten trinket, but something deliberately, if hastily, hidden. The rain outside seemed to intensify at that very moment. The wind whipping the branches against the side of the house with a sudden, brief violence. The locket felt impossibly cold, and for a moment, I had the distinct sensation that the faint floral scent I'd noticed earlier had become stronger, closer, as if someone unseen had just sided into the air beside me. I placed the locket on the mantelpiece, my mind racing. A fleeting shadow, a sigh from the walls, and now this. A hidden, damp locket appearing as the rain grew heavier. Coincidence? My rational mind struggled to maintain its grip against a rising tide of something far more primal. A creeping certainty that the house, animated by the persistent downpour, was slowly beginning to unveil its hidden layers, its forgotten stories. The solitude I had sought was no longer simply peaceful. It felt charged, expectant. My fingers kept returning to the cold surface of the silver locket on the mantelpiece, a silent, metallic question mark in the dim, rain-swept room. Each gust of wind that rattled the window frames seemed to draw my attention back to it, as if the storm itself was trying to highlight its presence. The solitude of the house, once a comforting blanket, now felt thin and porous, allowing unsettling whispers of the unknown to seep through with the persistent, chilling dampness carried by the rain. I felt a strange compulsion to understand its origin, yet also a profound reluctance to delve deeper. The rhythmic drumming of the rain on the roof seemed to change, subtly at first, then more noticeably. It was less a random patter, and more like a soft, insistent tapping, almost like fingernails drumming impatiently on the shingles directly above the living room. I tilted my head, listening intently, straining to discern if it was just the wind, playing tricks with the branches of the ancient trees overhead, or something else entirely. The air grew colder, and the faint, wild floral scent I'd noticed earlier returned. This time so potent it felt as if someone unseen had brushed past me, their perfume lingering in the air. Suddenly, the locket on the mantelpiece vibrated, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor against the wood, but I saw it. My breath hitched. As I stared, a single clear droplet of water welled up on its smooth, tarnished surface, as if the metal itself were weeping or sweating in the humid, charged air. It wasn't condensation. The room was cool, and no other metallic objects showed such a phenomenon. The drop clung there for a moment, shimmering in the dim light, before slowly, deliberately, tracing a path down the curved surface of the heart. Then, as another, stronger gust of wind buffeted the house, making the great trees groan, a low, sorrowful murmur seemed to breathe through the room. It was too indistinct to be words, yet it was undeniably a sound of grief, a mournful exhalation that seemed to emanate from the very wood and stone surrounding me, amplified by the relentless rain, the weeping locket, the mournful sigh, the insistent tapping. It felt like the house itself was trying to communicate, its secrets beginning to bleed through the veil of the ordinary, summoned by the storm. I stood frozen, the rational explanations I had clung to earlier dissolving like mist in the face of such direct, inexplicable phenomena. The rain continued its ceaseless drumming, no longer a soothing sound but a catalyst, awakening something within these ancient walls, something tied to that cold, weeping locket. What grief was held within this house under the trees? And why? Did it feel like the falling raindrops were keys, unlocking doors to a sorrow I was only just beginning to sense? The night, I knew with a chilling certainty, was far from over. Sleep had been a restless, shallow affair, punctuated by the memory of the weeping locket and the mournful sigh that had filled the living room. Dawn arrived, not with sunshine, but with a soft, gray light filtering through a steady, gentle drizzle, the kind of rain that seems determined to last for days. The air in the house felt heavy, imbued with an expectant stillness. I found myself listening intently to every creak and rustle, the ordinary sounds of an old house now layered with a sinister potential. My nerves still humming from the previous night's unsettling discoveries. The locket still lay on the mantelpiece, its silver surface now dull and dry, betraying nothing of its strange behavior. I avoided touching it, a superstitious caution taking root. Instead, I focused on the rain, a constant, hushed murmur against the leaves and the ancient wooden shingles of the roof. It was during these quieter moments, when the wind was low, that I began to hear them more distinctly. The whispers. They were faint, like the rustling of dry leaves, yet with an almost sibilant quality, seeming to weave in and out of the rain's rhythm. At first I dismissed them as auditory illusions, my mind still processing the strangeness of the house. But as the day wore on, the gentle rain persisting, the whispers became more defined, seeming to follow me from room to room. While making tea in the kitchen, a faint, breathy sound from the direction of the pantry door made me pause, a sequence of soft hisses that almost sounded like my name. Ra, drawn out and ethereal. My skin prickled, the hairs on my arms standing on end, despite the mild temperature of the room. I spun around, peering into the shadowy depths of the pantry, but there was nothing. Only shelves laden with old jars and the faint, lingering scent of dried herbs and that ever-present damp earth. The sound, if it had been real, was gone, swallowed by the gentle patter of the rain. Yet, the impression of that whispered name lingered, coiling in my stomach like a cold serpent. The house felt less like a passive structure and more like an ancient breathing entity, its secrets stirring with every drop of moisture seeping into its aged timbers. The solitude I had craved now felt double-edged, a vast, echoing space where such unsettling phenomena could take root and flourish in my perception. Mr. Hemlock's cryptic remark about the house making its presence known when the rains came replayed in my mind, no longer just an oddity, but a potential key. I found myself glancing repeatedly at the locket, wondering if its appearance was the true beginning of the house's stirring, a catalyst for these disquieting whispers that danced on the edge of my hearing. I tried to lose myself in a book, hoping the structured narrative would ground me, but the whispers persisted, a counterpoint to the gentle, unceasing rain. They seemed to emanate from the wooden walls themselves, from the dark corners and shadowed ceilings, a chorus of faint, sibilant sighs that ebbed and flowed with the shifting intensity of the drizzle. It was as if the very fabric of the house was saturated not just with moisture, but with these ephemeral, unsettling utterances, each one a tiny pinprick against the silence I had initially found so welcoming here. Frustration and a growing unease warred within me. I couldn't simply ignore these phenomena. They were too persistent, too specific. Determined to find a rational source, or at least confront whatever it was, I began a more thorough search of the main living area, running my hands along the wooden paneling, tapping sections that sounded hollow, peering behind a few pieces of heavy, antique furniture. The whispers seemed to intensify as I moved, almost as if encouraging or mocking my efforts, always just out of reach, just beyond comprehension. My search led me to a small built-in bookshelf in a dimly lit alcove, similar to the one where I'd found the locket, but on the opposite side of the grand stone hearth. Tucked away on the lowest shelf, partially obscured by a loose floorboard that had warped slightly upwards from the pervasive dampness, was a small, leather-bound book. It was darker than the surrounding wood, almost black, and its cover was buckled and stained, the pages visibly swollen from moisture. It felt cold and heavy in my hands, clearly a journal of some kind. A thrill of trepidation, mixed with an undeniable surge of curiosity, coursed through me. This felt significant. Another piece of the house's puzzle presenting itself, as if guided by the rain-stoked whispers. With trembling fingers, I carefully opened the cover. The first few pages were stuck together by the damp, but then, in spidery, faded handwriting emerged. The ink blurred in places, forming words that were difficult to decipher, hinting at loneliness and a deep, encroaching fear. The scent of old, wet paper and something faintly metallic, like old blood or rust, arose from its pages. The rain outside seemed to quicken its pace, the gentle drizzle transforming into a more steady, insistent downpour as I held the damp journal. The whispers around me swirled, growing louder for a moment, a chorus of hushed, indecipherable voices that seemed to react to the journal being disturbed, as if its secrets were their own. I carefully carried it over to the small desk by the window, the weight of its untold story feeling tangible in my hands. A new layer of mystery settling upon the house under the trees. Hours seemed to slip by as I painstakingly deciphered the looping, faded script within the damp journal. The author, a woman named Anya, according to a few clearer signatures, wrote not of daily events, but of impressions, fears, and strange occurrences tied intimately to the house and the ever-present rain. Her entries were fragmented, more like poetry than prose, speaking of eyes in the leaves and sighs from the roots, and a constant, pervasive loneliness that echoed my own growing unease. The patter of rain on the window pane was a constant accompaniment to my reading. Many entries referenced the weeping wood of the house, how it seemed to absorb the sorrows of the sky and breathe them back into the rooms. She wrote of feeling watched, of hearing soft lullabies when no child was present, and of a shadow that danced only when the storms were strong. The cryptic nature of her words was frustrating, yet deeply compelling, painting a portrait of a mind slowly succumbing to the house's oppressive atmosphere, or perhaps to a genuine haunting. Each page I turned felt heavier than the last. I was so engrossed in Anya's fragmented world that I didn't hear Mr. Hemlock's approach until his shadow fell across the rain-streaked window beside the desk. I jumped, startled, the journal nearly slipping from my grasp. He was standing just outside, a dark, stoic figure against the gray, dripping canvas of the woods, his expression unreadable. He tapped lightly on the glass, and I reluctantly unlatched the window. A gust of cool, damp air, thick with the scent of wet pine entering the room. "Best not to stir what slumbers in the old wood, miss," he said, his voice low, his gaze flicking to the open journal in my hands before returning to my face. "Some stories are like seeds buried in dark earth. They're best left undisturbed, lest they sprout into things one isn't prepared to face." He offered no explanation for his sudden appearance or his ominous words, framing them as mere local wisdom, a piece of timeless folklore about the perils of curiosity in these ancient woods. His warning, though couched in metaphor, sent a chill through me. It felt too pointed, too knowing, especially with Anya's sorrowful words fresh in my mind. I assured him I was merely reading an old book I'd found, but his eyes, like chips of slate, seemed to see right through my casual dismissal. As he retreated back into the rain-soaked trees, his words lingered, adding another layer of foreboding to the journal's cryptic contents and the incessant, whispering rain that continued to fall around the house. Mr. Hemlock's veiled threats, or perhaps genuine concerns, did little to dampen my curiosity. Instead, they fanned the flames, making the journal in my hands feel even more vital. If there were secrets here, things best left undisturbed, then Anya's writings were surely a path into their heart. The rain outside had settled into a mournful, steady rhythm, a somber soundtrack to my illicit delving. The whispers, too, seemed to have quieted, as if holding their breath in anticipation of what I might uncover next within the brittle, water-stained pages. I turned a page, and then another, the script becoming more erratic, more desperate. Anya wrote of a he who brought both joy and profound sorrow, of clandestine meetings by the ancient, gnarled oak at the edge of the property, the same oak where I had first seen Mr. Hemlock. Then, a particular entry, dated during a fierce autumn storm, described a small silver heart-shaped locket, a gift, she wrote, that held a promise, now cold as the endless rain. My own heart seemed to stop. My gaze flew to the mantelpiece. At that exact moment, as if responding to my recognition of its description in the journal, the tarnished silver locket I'd found began to gently rock back and forth on the wooden mantel. It was a subtle movement, barely perceptible at first, then more pronounced. A tiny, rhythmic arc against the stone. The whispers, silent moments before, erupted in a sudden, collective sigh that seemed to sweep through the room, carrying with them the faint, unmistakable scent of the wild floral perfume I'd smelled before, now tinged with an icy coldness. The locket continued its eerie motion for several long seconds. Then, with a final soft click against the wood, it fell still. But as it settled, its smooth, heart-shaped face slowly, almost deliberately, rotated a few degrees, as if an unseen hand had nudged it. It now faced not outwards into the room, but directly towards the old, leather-bound journal I held in my trembling hands. A silent, metallic accusation, or perhaps an invitation. The room grew colder, the rain outside suddenly feeling like a besieging force. Anya's fears, her sorrow, the mysterious he, and now the locket. It was all connected, tapestry of past tragedy woven into the very fabric of this house, a story that the rain and the whispers were desperately trying to tell. The journal entry had mentioned the locket held a promise. Now, its strange silent movement suggested it held something more, a secret it was now pointing towards. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the next chapter of this story lay in understanding what that cold, silver heart truly guarded. The days that followed the locket's eerie message blurred into a relentless cycle of gray skies and an even heavier, more persistent rain. It was no longer the gentle drizzle or the steady patter of before, but a determined, soaking downpour that drummed incessantly on the roof and gushed from the overflowing eaves. The world outside the windows became a watercolor wash of greens and browns, the forest obscured by sheets of falling water. Inside, the air grew thick with humidity, and the scent of damp wood was now a constant, pervasive presence in every room. It was during this period of relentless deluge that the stains began to appear. At first, they were faint, like shadowy bruises on the old wooden walls and floorboards in the living room and the hallway leading to the study. Dark, irregular patches that seemed to bloom overnight, spreading slowly outwards from the core of the house. I initially attributed them to the sheer volume of rain, imagining hidden leaks or the ancient timber finally succumbing to the overwhelming moisture, a natural consequence of the storm. Soon, however, I noticed their peculiar nature. The stains weren't random. They formed intricate, almost deliberate patterns, resembling a spidery, unknown script or the veins of some giant unseen leaf. And stranger still, they seemed to shift. A dark tendril I was certain had curled towards the fireplace in the morning would, by afternoon, appear to lean towards the window, its edges subtly altered, its overall shape rearranged as if guided by an unseen, methodical hand when my back was turned. This unsettling phenomenon became a morbid fascination. I found myself staring at the evolving patterns for long stretches, a pad of drawing paper and a charcoal pencil in hand, attempting to capture their eerie calligraphy before they transformed anew. The whispers in the house seemed to accompany their growth, a low, sibilant murmur that rose and fell with the intensity of the rain, almost as if the stains themselves were breathing, sighing out the secrets absorbed by the weeping wood, just as Anya's journal had described. Each morning, I would anxiously survey the walls, discovering new formations or significant alterations to existing ones. It felt as if the house itself was trying to communicate something vital through these shifting, aqueous markings, a silent language written in water and time. Were they warnings, directions, or merely the random artistry of decay, amplified by my increasingly isolated and unnerved imagination? The rain continued its relentless assault, each drop a tiny chisel, carving away at the boundaries of the known. My sketchbook pages began to fill with intricate, spidery renderings of the ever-changing water stains. I'd trace a pattern in the morning, only to find it subtly altered by evening, its dark tendrils having crept in new directions, its core having deepened or lightened. It was maddening, like trying to map the course of a living, breathing organism. The whispers seemed to mock my efforts, a constant low hum beneath the relentless drumming of the heavy rain, as if an unseen audience was observing my futile attempts to understand their cryptic language. One afternoon, as the downpour reached a new ferocity, the sky outside turning an almost bruised purple, I was standing by the large window in the study, the one Anya had often mentioned. The rain hammered against the glass in solid sheets, blurring the ancient trees into indistinct, wavering shapes. And then, for a heart-stopping moment, through the cascading water, I saw her. A woman, standing just beyond the rain-streaked pane, her form more defined than any fleeting shadow before, yet still frustratingly translucent, her features sorrowful and indistinct, her gaze fixed upon me. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth, the charcoal pencil clattering to the floor. It was undeniably the figure of a woman, her silhouette slender, and draped in what looked like a long, old-fashioned dress, soaked through and clinging to her spectral form. She didn't move, didn't gesture, just stood there in the raging storm, a silent, sorrowful apparition. Her presence felt like an electric shock, a profound confirmation that the house's secrets were not just sounds and stains, but something far more tangible, something deeply human and tragic. Before I could gather my wits to speak, to even breathe properly, she was gone. One moment she was there, a haunting presence against the storm-lashed window. The next, only the relentless rain and the blurred forest remained. My heart hammered against my ribs. The image of her sorrowful face, though indistinct, was seared into my mind. This was no trick of the light. This was Anya, perhaps, or another spirit bound to this house, her sorrow amplified and made visible by the sheer force of the deluge. Just as I was trying to process this terrifying vision, a sharp, authoritative rapping echoed from the front door, distinct even above the roar of the rain. It made me jump again, my nerves already frayed raw. Peering through the small, distorted glass pane in the door, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, holding a large, dark umbrella that seemed insufficient against the downpour. She was older, with a stern face and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to be assessing the house, and perhaps me, even before I opened the door. Reluctantly, I pulled open the heavy oak door, which groaned in protest. The woman outside lowered her umbrella slightly, revealing sharp features and a penetrating gaze that seemed to catalog me instantly. Her gray hair was pulled into a tight bun, and she wore a practical yet elegant coat that somehow seemed impervious to the torrential rain lashing around us. "Miss Alara Vance, I presume?" Her voice was clear and cutting, no nonsense, perfectly matching her formidable appearance and the relentless weather. She introduced herself as Millicent Thorne, from the County Historical Society, stating she was in the area and thought she'd stop by to see the new tenant of the house under the trees, as she called it, with a faint, ironic emphasis. Her interest, however, felt far more specific than a casual visit. Her questions were direct, almost invasive. What brought me to such an isolated place? How long did I intend to stay? Had I noticed any of the house's structural peculiarities, especially during inclement weather? I remained guarded, offering vague answers about needing solitude for a personal project. The image of the figure at the window was still seared into my mind, and I had no intention of sharing such experiences with this discerning stranger. Ms. Thorne, however, pressed on, mentioning in passing that the house had a rather colorful history, and that not all its previous occupants had found the solitude quite so restful. Her words were carefully chosen, but the implication was clear and unsettling. Her sharp gaze seemed to land on my sketchbook, left open on the low coffee table, revealing the dark, sinuous shapes of the water stains I had been documenting. A thin eyebrow arched. "Interesting patterns," she remarked, her voice neutral, but her eyes glinting with an interest that made me feel like an insect under a pin. "The house has many ways of expressing itself, especially when it rains. Some say it tries to tell its stories through the very wood." The tension in the room was palpable, a counterpoint to the fury of the storm outside. Ms. Thorne exuded an air of unspoken knowledge, her questions and observations feeling less like a conversation and more like a subtle yet insistent interrogation. I felt a growing sense of unease, as if she knew more about the house, and perhaps about me. Then she led on. Her visit, amidst the storm and my own burgeoning fears, felt like another ill omen, another cog in the unseen mechanism binding me to this place. Ms. Thorne's gaze lingered on my sketches of the stains a moment longer, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "It's said that the wood of this house soaked up more than just rainwater over the centuries," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, drawing me in despite my wariness. "It absorbed sorrows, secrets. Some even claim it remembers faces. Have you found it remembers any, Miss Vance, during these long, wet days? Perhaps a woman's face, seen as if through a veil of tears?" The directness of the question, mirroring my own vision, struck me like a physical blow. I stammered a denial, but my voice lacked conviction even to my own ears. The accuracy of her insinuation was terrifying. Was she guessing, or did she know something concrete? "Folklore, of course," Ms. Thorne added smoothly, though her eyes suggested otherwise. "This area is steeped in it. Tales of a weeping lady, tied to the original family who built this house, particularly during storms like this one. They say she searches for something she lost, her image sometimes caught in the reflections, or in the patterns the dampness leaves on the oldest timbers." With a final, penetrating look, Ms. Thorne deemed her visit concluded. She rose, adjusting her coat, the sharp umbrella once again in hand. "Do be careful, my dear," she said, pausing at the threshold, the wind and rain howling around her like hungry wolves. Curiosity can be a powerful current. It can uncover treasures, or it can pull you under into waters far deeper and darker than you ever intended to explore. Her words hung in the air, a clear warning veiled as a polite farewell, before she turned and disappeared into the maelstrom. The moment the door closed, plunging me back into the house's isolated embrace, the largest water stain on the wall opposite me seemed to visibly darken and contort. Its spidery tendrils writhed, coalescing for a horrifying instant into a shape that chillingly resembled a grotesque, weeping face, its mouth open in a silent scream, before dissolving back into an abstract pattern. The whispers in the room swelled into a cacophony of mournful sighs, and then, abruptly, fell silent, leaving an oppressive, ringing quietude broken only by the relentless storm. Ms. Thorne's visit, her pointed questions, and her chilling folklore about a weeping lady and images and reflections, coupled with the stain's terrifying transformation, left me trembling. Had she come to warn me, or to glean how much I already knew? And what of these reflections she mentioned? The house, it seemed, was not just passively revealing its secrets through the rain. It was actively, and perhaps malevolently, responding. My gaze was drawn to the dark, rain-battered windows, no longer just barriers against the storm, but potential mirrors to a past I was increasingly terrified to confront. The echo of Ms. Thorne's departure and the grotesque transformation of the water stain left an icy residue in the air, a chilling counterpoint to the storm's unabated fury. Sleep offered no escape, only a landscape of swirling mists and sorrowful, indistinct faces. I woke to the same relentless roar of wind and rain, the house groaning under the assault. Her words about reflections lingered, and I found myself warily glancing at any polished surface, half expecting to see more than just my own tired face staring back, the ordinary world now feeling thin and unreliable. The storm, far from abating, seemed to gather strength throughout the morning, a true tempest now. The sky was a bruised, turbulent gray, and the wind howled like a banshee through the ancient, thrashing trees that surrounded the house, their branches scraping and clawing at the roof and walls. Rain lashed down in near horizontal sheets, turning the grounds into a sodden morass. Around the exposed stone foundation of the house, large, shimmering puddles began to form, their surfaces constantly broken by the impact of the heavy drops, mirroring the chaotic sky above. Drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, and armed with Ms. Thorne's unsettling suggestion, I found myself peering out of the study window, the one where I'd seen the spectral woman. My gaze fell upon one of the larger puddles, its surface momentarily stilled between gusts. For a fraction of a second, instead of the turbulent gray sky, I saw a flicker of something else. A distorted glimpse of an old-fashioned gas lamp, a cobblestone path, and the hem of a long, dark skirt vanishing around a corner. I blinked, pressing, my face closer to the cold glass, my breath fogging the pain. The image was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the chaotic dance of raindrops on the water's surface. Had I imagined it? A trick of the light, perhaps? Or a fragment of a dream still clinging to my waking mind? Yet Ms. Thorne's voice echoed in my memory, her image sometimes caught in the reflections. The fleeting vision had felt too specific, too anachronistic to be easily dismissed as mere fancy. A new kind of dread, mingled with a strange, almost academic fascination, began to take root. If these puddles, born from the storm's fury, could indeed hold echoes of the past, then what other secrets lay waiting to be revealed? The house was no longer just staining its walls or whispering in the downpour. It felt as if it were actively projecting its memories, using the storm's raw energy to bridge the gap between then and now. The rain felt less like a cleansing force and more like a developing fluid, slowly bringing hidden images to light. I moved from window to window, a restless sentinel drawn to the shimmering temporary mirrors formed by the storm. The fleeting glimpses continued, each one a maddeningly brief vignette. A child's wooden toy abandoned on a path, a gloved hand gripping a gate latch, the severe silhouette of a man in a tall hat turning away. These disjointed fragments, reflected in the storm-tossed puddles, were like pieces of a shattered story, offering tantalizing clues, but no coherent narrative, leaving me to wonder about their context and their sorrow. Then, in a large, relatively calm puddle nestled between two exposed roots of the great oak tree near the study, the image sharpened with horrifying clarity. It wasn't a fleeting scene this time, but a sustained vision. Reflected in the murky water was the sorrowful woman I had seen at the window, her translucent figure kneeling on the wet ground, her head bowed as if in grief or despair. Yet, when I frantically scanned the actual space beside the oak tree, there was nothing but the driving rain and swaying branches. She existed only in the puddle's dark mirror. My breath caught in my throat, a strangled gasp. Seeing her so clearly, her despair so palpable in the watery reflection, was profoundly disturbing. This was no mere trick of light. This was a direct, impossible observation. The puddle held her image as if she were physically there, yet the reality was empty. It felt as if the storm had ripped a hole in time, allowing me to peer into a moment of her suffering, a private grief now exposed in the most unsettling way imaginable, reflected from a past I could not touch. The communication, if that's what it was, felt intensely personal now, targeted. The house, or the entity connected to it, was no longer just hinting. It was showing me its pain, its history, through these watery portals. The wind howled, a mournful symphony accompanying the spectral vision, and the rain seemed to fall with a renewed, almost furious intensity, as if emphasizing the significance of what I was witnessing. The secrets were no longer confined to whispers and stains. They were now vivid, moving pictures of sorrow. Just as I recoiled from the window, shaken to my core, a heavy thud came from the direction of the back kitchen door, followed by a gruff shout that was barely audible over the storm's roar. My heart leaped. Through the small, rain-lashed window in the kitchen door, I saw Mr. Hemlock, drenched and wrestling with a large fallen branch that had apparently slammed against the house. He looked more rugged and elemental than ever, a figure seemingly born of the storm itself, his usual stoicism replaced by a grim urgency. I hurried to the kitchen door, fumbling with the bolt, and pulled it open against the force of the wind. Mr. Hemlock practically stumbled inside, dragging a blast of cold, wet air and the scent of shattered pine with him. He was soaked to the bone, his weathered face grim, and he quickly shoved the door closed against the storm's relentless assault. Branch nearly came through the wall, he grunted, shaking his head, water streaming from his hair and coat onto the stone floor, his usual stoicism momentarily fractured by the near miss. As he caught his breath, leaning heavily against the door, his gaze fell upon me, and his expression sharpened, noting my own disheveled state, my wide, frightened eyes. "This storm's a bad one," he stated, his voice a low rumble. Brings out the worst in the woods, and in this old house too. You been seeing things you can't explain, miss? Things in the water, maybe? The house likes to show its old wounds when it's bleeding rain like this. His directness was startling, a stark departure from his usual cryptic utterances. Yes, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper, the image of the kneeling woman in the puddle still vivid in my mind. Reflections of things that aren't there. A woman. His eyes, dark and deep-set, held mine. He nodded slowly, a profound weariness in his expression. Her. She walks these grounds in spirit when the heavens weep. The water holds her, memory, like a looking glass into a sorrow that never quite fades. Best not to stare too long into such mirrors, Miss Vance. They can draw you in. His confirmation, so blunt and unequivocal, sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. It wasn't just my imagination then. These visions were known, perhaps even expected, by those familiar with the house's dark reputation. He knew about the woman, about the reflections. Why? I pressed, a desperate need for understanding overriding my fear. Why does she stay? What is she looking for? The storm seemed to pause, a momentary lull in its fury, as if listening alongside me. Mr. Hemlock looked away then, towards the rain-lashed window, his jaw tight. Some say she's looking for what was taken from her. Others say she's a guardian, of a different sort. A warning. The house remembers, Miss Vance. And during storms like these, it wants others to remember too. Just as he spoke, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the kitchen, followed by an earth-shattering clap of thunder. In that brief, stark illumination, I saw a fleeting, distorted face in the rain-streaked window pane. Not the woman, but a man's angry, contorted features there and gone in an instant. I must have cried out. Or perhaps my sudden pallor was enough, because Mr. Hemlock's gaze snapped back to me, sharp and assessing. He glanced at the window, then back at my terrified face, his own expression becoming even more guarded, if that were possible. The storm plays tricks with the light, with the old glass, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Yet his eyes conveyed a deeper understanding, a silent acknowledgement that what I'd seen was likely more than a mere trick. He didn't question me further, didn't pry. He simply let his statement hang in the electrified air. He pushed himself away from the door, the immediate crisis of the fallen branch seemingly dealt with, or at least postponed. Secure your shutters, Miss Vance, and stay away from the windows. This house, it has a long memory, and the storm gives it a loud voice. Not all of its stories are meant for gentle ears. He gave a curt nod. Then, without another word, he moved through the kitchen and disappeared into the gloom of the hallway, presumably to check other parts of the house for damage, or to find another exit less battered by the wind. Left alone once more, the image of the angry, contorted face burned behind my eyelids. It was a stark contrast to the sorrowful woman. This felt like rage, like malice. The house wasn't just showing me grief. It was hinting at a darker, more violent undercurrent. Trembling, I felt an irresistible pull, a dreadful compulsion to look again, to understand how this new, malevolent presence factored into the tragedy. My feet, seemingly of their own accord, carried me back towards the study, towards the puddles that acted as the house's dark, watery eyes. I peered into the same large puddle near the oak tree, the one that had shown me the kneeling woman so clearly. For a moment, there was nothing but the swirling, muddy water. Then, the surface stilled, and a new scene resolved itself with horrifying clarity. It was the sorrowful woman again, but this time she was not alone. The angry man whose face I'd seen in the window was there with her, his hand raised, his face a mask of fury. I saw no physical blow, but the woman cringed, her spectral form seeming to shrink before him, an image of pure, terror-filled submission. The reflection shattered, as a violent gust of wind swept across the puddle, but the sickening image was branded into my mind. This wasn't just a story of loss. It was a story of cruelty, of fear. The direct communication had taken a terrifying turn, showing me not just sorrow, but the probable source of that sorrow. The house wasn't just remembering, it was bearing. Witness to a past so brutal it still screamed out for acknowledgement through the raging storm. And I was the one who was listening. The terrible vision of the angry man and the cowering woman, reflected in the storm-tossed puddle, haunted my waking hours and infiltrated my sleep. When dawn finally broke, the great storm had begun to subside, its fury dwindling to a mournful, intermittent rain and a restless, sighing wind. The world outside was battered and waterlogged, the grounds around the house a scene of muddy disarray, littered with fallen leaves and broken branches. The air felt scoured, yet heavy with an unspoken tension, the house itself seeming to brood, in the gray, uncertain light. Unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere inside, I ventured out, bundled in a waterproof coat, my boots sinking into the sodden earth. I felt a morbid compulsion to survey the damage, particularly around the ancient oak tree that had served as a screen for such disturbing reflections. The ground near its massive, exposed roots was deeply eroded, channels carved by the sheer volume of runoff. It was there, nestled in a freshly gouged hollow, half buried in mud and tangled roots, that I saw it. The dark corner of something small and wooden. My heart gave a familiar lurch of apprehension and fateful curiosity. With a surge of adrenaline, I knelt in the mud, using a piece of fallen slate to carefully scrape away the clinging earth and debris. The object was a small rectangular wooden box, its surface blackened and warped from long burial and the recent deluge. It was surprisingly heavy, its lid tightly shut, swollen by the damp. The air around it seemed colder, and the fine drizzle that still fell felt like icy needles on my exposed skin as I worked to free it. A profound sense of trespassing washed over me as I finally prized the box from the earth's reluctant grasp. It felt ancient, a forgotten coffer of secrets that the storm had purposefully, or perhaps indifferently, disgorged. This was no accidental find. It felt like another deliberate offering from the house, or from the sorrowful spirit tied to it. A further step down a path from which I felt increasingly unable to retreat. The gentle patter of rain on the box's lid sounded like soft, expectant drum beats in the otherwise quiet aftermath of the storm. Back inside, my hands trembling, I managed to force open the swollen lid. The interior was lined with what looked like rotted velvet, and nestled within were a few pathetically small items. There was a tiny, exquisitely carved wooden bird, its painted details faded, but still visible. Clearly a child's cherished plaything. Beside it lay a delicate silver chain, broken, and a single child-sized leather glove, stiff and stained. Beneath these, almost hidden in the decaying fabric, was another locket. Smaller than Anya's, this one oval, and made of what looked like tarnished brass. Okay, here are the next 5 paragraphs of Chapter 5, paragraphs 6 to 10. I carefully laid the fragile, soaked relics out on a clean cloth on the study desk. The little wooden bird, though saturated, still possessed a poignant charm, its tiny carved eye seeming to watch me. The small brass locket was stubbornly closed, resisting my attempts to open it without causing damage. Each item pulsed with a melancholic energy, the years of being buried, of absorbing the earth's damp secrets, clinging to them like a shroud. The light, persistent drizzle outside continued its soft lament against the window panes, the air inside the house growing colder, heavier. As I gently touched the sodden leather of the child's glove, a wave of profound sadness washed over me, so intense it nearly brought me to my knees. It was an alien grief, too vast and specific to be my own, yet it resonated deep within my chest. Simultaneously, the familiar whispers in the room escalated, no longer faint hisses, but distinct, sorrowful murmurs that seemed to coalesce around me and the small, pitiful objects on the desk. A cold spot formed in the room, so icy it made my teeth chatter. The connection was undeniable. These waterlogged relics were acting as a conduit, an amplifier for the house's sorrowful manifestations. The lingering moisture on them, a residue of the storm that had unearthed them, seemed to feed the phenomena. The presence in the house, which I increasingly believed to be the spirit of the sorrowful woman, felt more focused, more intensely directed towards me than ever before. It was as if my discovery of these items had breached a new layer of her consciousness, her grief. I felt an overwhelming urge to protect these small tokens, these remnants of a lost childhood and a broken promise. The sorrow they exuded was almost a physical ache within me. The whispers seemed to plead, to urge me towards some unknown action. The floral scent, so often a precursor to a stronger manifestation, returned, this time mingled with the faint, unmistakable smell of damp wool, like a child's wet clothing. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Overwhelmed, I gathered the damp items carefully. As my fingers closed around the small, cold brass locket, a fleeting image flashed through my mind. A little girl with dark, frightened eyes, clutching the wooden bird, her other hand reaching out. It was gone, in an instant, but the emotional impact was staggering. The presence was not just showing me its grief anymore. It was sharing the very essence of its loss, using these soaked relics as a bridge across time, directly into my heart. The image of the frightened little girl, her dark eyes wide with an unnamed terror, clung to my mind like a burr. It was a raw, visceral connection, far more potent than the sorrowful, ethereal presence of the woman I had grown somewhat accustomed to. This was the grief of a child, a loss so profound it had seeped into the very earth, only to be released by the storm's tears. The fine drizzle outside seemed to mirror the unshed tears I felt welling within me, a shared sorrow across the ages. Clutching the small, damp brass locket in my hand, I found myself whispering aloud, "What happened to you? What do you want me to do?" The only reply was a profound stillness that fell upon the room, the usual whispers momentarily hushed, as if in rapt attention. Then, a single soft sigh, like a breath released after holding it for too long, seemed to brush past my ear, and the wooden bird on the desk inexplicably rocked gently once, as if nudged by an unseen hand. A deep sense of responsibility settled over me. These weren't just objects. They were the last vestiges of a life or lives, tragically cut short. I couldn't simply cast them aside. I found a dry silk scarf in my drawer and carefully wrapped the little wooden bird, the broken chain, the child's glove, and the unopened brass locket within its folds. As I did so, a faint warmth seemed to emanate from the bundle, and the oppressive cold in the room lessened almost imperceptibly. A silent acknowledgement, perhaps, of my gesture. From that moment on, the presence in the house felt irrevocably tethered to me. It was no longer just a general haunting of the location, but a focused, almost constant companionship. When I moved through the rooms, I felt a subtle stirring in the air beside me, a faint pressure as if someone unseen walked by my side. The whispers, when they returned, were softer, closer, more like confidences than mournful cries, as if I had finally earned a measure of trust from the sorrowful inhabitants of this house. My thoughts kept returning to the two lockets. Anya's silver heart, found hidden on a shelf, and this child's tarnished brass oval, unearthed from the sodden ground. Were they connected? Was Anya the sorrowful woman? And was this child hers? Or were these separate tragedies, their echoes intertwined by the house's long memory and the relentless, revealing rain? The question swirled, demanding answers that I knew could only be found deeper within the house's embrace, and perhaps within the secrets the locket still held. The small, tarnished brass locket, nestled within the silk scarf along with the other relics, seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it held another piece of the puzzle, perhaps a name or a face to attach to the immense sorrow I now felt so keenly. The light rain outside continued its gentle patter, a constant reminder of the forces that had brought these secrets to light. The air within the house still damp and cool, keeping the relic's strange influence alive and potent. With delicate care, I tried to find a clasp or hinge on the oval locket. It was stubborn, sealed by time and corrosion. As I gently probed its edges with a fingernail, the whispers in the room seemed to intensify, swirling around me like a vortex of anxious anticipation. A cold draft, originating from no discernible source, swept through the study, ruffling the pages of Anya's journal lying open on the desk. The focused presence felt incredibly close, as if the spirit of the child, or perhaps the woman, was peering over my shoulder. Then, with a tiny grating click, the locket sprang open. Inside, protected by a remarkably intact sliver of glass, was a miniature hand-tinted photograph. It was a portrait of a young girl, no older than 5 or 6, with wide, dark, solemn eyes and hair pulled back with a simple ribbon. Her expression was serious, yet there was a hint of a shy smile playing on her lips. It was, unmistakably, the child from my fleeting vision, the little girl who had clutched the wooden bird. My breath hitched, and tears pricked my eyes. Seeing her face so clearly, so innocent and real, made the tragedy feel incredibly immediate and personal. As I stared at the tiny portrait, the focused presence in the room surged with an overwhelming wave of emotion. Not just sorrow, but a profound, almost unbearable love, followed by a piercing stab of fear and despair. A single, clear whisper detached itself from the others. Lily, it sighed, the name echoing in the stillness, a mother's tender, heartbroken utterance. Lily. The child had a name. The locket, this tiny, precious relic, had given her back a piece of her identity. The emotional connection I felt was now a concrete bond, a heavy weight of responsibility to understand what had happened to this little girl and her grieving mother. The house, the rain, the spirits, they had drawn me into the heart of their tragedy, and I knew there was no turning back. The path ahead was shrouded in more secrets, but now it was also lit by a child's name. Knowing Lily's name changed everything. The sorrow in the house now had a focal point, a tiny face in a tarnished brass locket. The presence, Lily's mother, I was now certain, felt less like a diffuse haunting and more like a constant, sorrowful companion, her grief a palpable weight in the air. For a couple of days, the relentless rains had eased, replaced by intermittent showers and brief spells of watery sunshine. The earth outside, still saturated, began to release a different kind of scent into the humid air, a change I initially welcomed, hoping it signaled a shift in the house's oppressive mood. It began subtly, the clean, earthy fragrance of petrichor, that unique aroma of rain meeting dry soil, wafting in through the slightly open windows. But soon, this scent became overwhelmingly strong, even indoors, far more potent than it should have been. It was as if the very foundations of the house were exhaling it. Mingled with this intense petrichor was another, more delicate fragrance, the distinct, old-fashioned scent of violets and rose, a perfume I'd only caught in fleeting, ghostly traces before, now undeniably present and persistent. With this strange commingling of scents, the emotional echoes began. One moment I'd be making tea. The next, an inexplicable wave of poignant joy, so intense it brought tears to my eyes, would wash over me. A fleeting memory of sunlight on a child's laughter. Then, just as quickly, it would be replaced by a crushing despair. A sense of betrayal so profound it left me breathless and disoriented. These were not my emotions, not my memories, yet they consumed me with an alarming, vivid intensity. I struggled to maintain my own sense of self against this barrage of spectral feelings. It was as if the perfumes, the earthy petrichor of the exposed ground, and the floral scent of the grieving mother were acting as keys, unlocking doorways in my mind to her past experiences, her joys and her deepest sorrows. The boundaries of my own consciousness felt porous, susceptible to the overwhelming emotional charge that permeated every corner of this house, a house saturated with more than just rain. The violet and rose perfume, when it was strongest, often brought with it a fleeting sense of a gentle, loving personality, a warmth that counteracted the pervasive sorrow. It painted a picture of Lily's mother as someone more than just a weeping phantom. She had known happiness. She had loved deeply. This only made the encroaching despair, the memories of fear and betrayal that also bled through, all the more unbearable. The house, through these potent, invisible scents, was forcing me to live her life in fragments. To cope with the sensory onslaught and the terrifying erosion of my own emotional boundaries, I immersed myself in Anya's journal again, searching for any mention of a violet and rose perfume or a child named Lily. The script, however, remained frustratingly oblique, filled with poetic despair, but few concrete details that could anchor the overwhelming experiences. The relics, Lily's locket and her tiny wooden bird, lay wrapped in silk, yet their presence felt amplified by the pervasive scents, their sorrowful aura a constant hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. It was during a moment when the petrichor scent was particularly pungent, so thick I felt I could almost taste the damp earth, that Mr. Hemlock appeared at the edge of the woods, near the old oak. He wasn't looking at the house this time, but rather examining the ground, his posture thoughtful. Seeing me at the window, he gave a slow nod and ambled closer, his boots making soft, squelching sounds on the saturated lawn. The air around him seemed to carry the clean, sharp scent of pine, momentarily cutting through the house's dominant perfumes. "The ground breathes after a long rain, miss," he said, his voice softer than usual. as he stopped a polite distance from the porch. "Releases all sorts of old memories. You been comfortable?" The question was casual, yet his eyes, those knowing slate chips, searched mine for something more. I felt compelled to ask, to seek some grounding in the flood of emotions. "Mr. Hemlock," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "The perfume, violets and roses, and a child lily. Do you know of them?" He looked down, his gaze fixed on a patch of disturbed earth near the porch steps, for a long moment. "Lily," he finally murmured, the name a soft echo on his lips. "A sweet little thing, like a woodland flower." And her mother, yes, she was fond of such perfumes, said it reminded her of her own mother's garden, a place of happiness. His words were gentle, painting a tender picture that resonated with the fleeting joys I'd glimpsed, a confirmation that these echoes were real. "They loved this place, you know," he continued, his gaze drifting up to the ancient trees that sheltered the house. "Found peace here, for a time, before the unpleasantness." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "Some things are best remembered. For their sweetness, Miss Vance, not for the sorrow that followed. Don't go digging too deep for roots that are bitter. They can poison the whole plant." His words, though softly spoken, carried a familiar weight of warning, a gentle discouragement from probing the darkness I knew still lurked. Mr. Hemlock's gentle reminiscence about Lily and her mother, and his subsequent warning about bitter roots, left me with a confusing mix of warmth and apprehension. The image of a happy child and a loving mother, surrounded by the scent of violets and roses, was a fragile comfort against the pervasive sorrow I'd become so attuned to. Yet, his reluctance to speak of the unpleasantness only deepened the shadows, suggesting that the true horror of their story remained carefully veiled, perhaps for my own protection, or for his. A day later, as a weak sun tried to penetrate, the lingering gray, Ms. Millicent Thorne paid another unannounced visit. She arrived not with the bluster of the storm this time, but with a crisp, almost unnervingly cheerful demeanor that set my teeth on edge. She carried a slim file under her arm, and her sharp eyes scanned the interior of the house with a proprietary air, missing nothing. The air, still thick with the faint mingled scents of petrichor and old perfume, seemed to crackle slightly with her presence. "I trust you're finding your retreat conducive, Miss Vance," she began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I was reviewing some old records at the Historical Society. This property, as you can imagine, features quite prominently, and I came across a few details I thought might illuminate your understanding of its unique character." Her tone was helpful, almost solicitous, yet I sensed an agenda beneath the surface, a stark contrast to Mr. Hemlock's melancholic sincerity. She opened the file, revealing a faded photograph of the house, starker and more isolated than it appeared now, and a copy of what looked like an old newspaper clipping, the headline too small to read from where I stood. "Lily, you said?" Ms. Thorne remarked, her gaze sharp, though I hadn't mentioned the name to her. A tragic tale, that one. Not quite the idyllic picture of woodland flowers and gentle perfumes some might paint. The child was often ill, and the mother, well, let's just say her sorrows were perhaps more self-inflicted than poetically endured. The words, so casually cruel, struck me like a slap. This was a starkly different narrative from Mr. Hemlock's gentle portrayal. Ms. Thorne's version painted the mother not as a victim of circumstance, but as a flawed, perhaps unstable woman, and Lily as a sickly child. It was a deliberate attempt, I felt, to tarnish the fragile connection I had formed, to cast doubt on the purity of the grief I had witnessed and shared. The sweet scent of roses in the room suddenly felt cloying, almost rotten. "That's not what I've felt," I countered, my voice firmer than I expected, a surge of protectiveness rising for the grieving mother and child whose presence had become so intimately known to me. "Their sorrow feels genuine, profound." Ms. Thorne merely smiled, a thin, knowing expression. "Grief can be a very persuasive performance, Miss Vance, especially when there are guilty secrets to mask. The mother, Eleanor, was known for her rather dramatic inclinations, long before any real tragedy struck. Some said she courted it." She tapped the faded newspaper clipping in her file. "An unfortunate incident involving the child Lily. A terrible accident officially. But there were whispers, of course. Neglect. An overburdened mother whose attentions were elsewhere." Ms. Thorne's gaze was like a scalpel, dissecting the sympathetic narrative I had started to build. She was deliberately seeding doubt, painting Eleanor not as a victim, but as a potential cause, trying to poison the very connection I had felt through the sense and the emotional echoes. Just as Ms. Thorne prepared to offer another piece of her carefully curated history, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The scent of violets and roses in the room suddenly intensified, overwhelmingly sweet, and with it came a searing flash of emotion, not my own. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated maternal love, a fierce, protective adoration for a small, giggling child, followed by an agonizing stab of fear, so sharp and sudden it felt like a physical blow, as if witnessing a terrible, unforeseen danger hurtling towards that beloved child. The unsolicited memory, so vivid and powerful, was a direct rebuttal to Ms. Thorne's insinuations. It was pure, untainted by any dramatic inclination or neglect. It was the raw, instinctive terror of a mother fearing for her child. The petrichor scent surged, too, grounding me in the house's ancient sorrow, a testament to a grief that felt far too profound for performative guilt. When the wave receded, leaving me trembling, Ms. Thorne was watching me with an unreadable expression, her narrative momentarily interrupted by my obvious distress. She soon departed, leaving her file with its unsettling implications on the table, a parting shot in her campaign of doubt. But her words, however sharp, could not erase the potent truth of the emotion I had just experienced. The conflict was clear. Mr. Hemlock's gentle guidance towards remembering sweetness, and Ms. Thorne's cynical insistence on a darker, more culpable past. I was caught between them, but the spirits themselves, through shared scent and sorrow, were offering their own testimony. I knew then that understanding their truth meant navigating a labyrinth of contested memories, with only my own fractured empathy as a guide. Days passed in a haze of suspicion and a deepening resolve. Ms. Thorne's cynical account of Eleanor and Lily warred constantly with the raw, undeniable emotions the house had shared with me. I clung to the memory of that fierce maternal love, that stab of pure terror, as my compass. The file she'd left lay untouched, a venomous offering I refused to accept. Outside, the weather mirrored my internal turmoil, a brooding stillness giving way to a darkening, bruised sky that promised a storm of significant magnitude, far eclipsing what had come before. It arrived with the fury of a vengeful god. One moment, an oppressive calm. The next, the heavens ripped open, Wind howled like a tormented spirit, driving sheets of rain against the house with such force the windows rattled violently in their frames. Thunder cracked directly overhead, each explosion shaking the very foundations of the ancient structure, and lightning illuminated the thrashing woods in stark, terrifying flashes. The house groaned and shuddered under the assault, a ship caught in a maelstrom, trapping me within its straining timbers. Almost immediately, the spectral phenomena escalated, beyond anything I had previously experienced. The whispers were no longer sibilant murmurs, but clear, urgent pleas and sorrowful cries, seeming to emanate from multiple directions at once. Cold spots became biting Arctic vortexes that swept through rooms. Small objects on shelves and tables vibrated, and once, the door to the study, which I had left slightly ajar, slammed shut with a resounding bang, though no draft could account for it. The air grew thick with the scent of petrichor, roses, and an acrid tang of ozone from the lightning. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my resolve, but it was mingled with a strange, heightened sense of awareness. The spirits, Eleanor and Lily, were not just present. They were agitated, empowered by the storm's ferocious energy. Their sorrow, their terror, their desperate need to communicate felt almost tangible in the violently charged atmosphere. It was as if the storm had torn down the last vestiges of the veil separating our worlds, and they were now clamoring to be heard, to be understood, their emotions bleeding directly into the physical space around me. And for the first time, I felt an undeniable intelligence behind it all. These weren't random echoes or uncontrolled bursts of emotion anymore. The slamming door, the focused intensity of the cold, the way the whispers seemed to respond to my movements, my thoughts. It all suggested a deliberate, conscious mind, or minds, orchestrating the manifestations. They were trying to show me something, to lead me. Their desperation amplified by the roaring tempest that raged both outside and, increasingly, within the very heart of the house. With a newfound, albeit terrified sense of purpose, I tried to surrender to the guidance. "Show me," I whispered into the roaring chaos. "Show me what you need me to see." The response was immediate. A blast of icy air swept down the main hallway, extinguishing the flickering emergency lantern I held, plunging me into near darkness relieved only by the strobing flashes of lightning. The whispers intensified ahead of me, beckoning me forward, past the groaning walls and rattling fixtures, deeper into the storm-tossed heart of the house. I stumbled forward, my heart pounding in sync with the deafening thunderclaps. The house felt alive, writhing around me. Just as I reached the oldest part of the structure, a section where the original, massive tree trunks were visibly integrated into the load-bearing walls, an enormous crack of thunder, louder than any before, seemed to shake the world. Simultaneously, one of the ancient, gnarled trees outside let out a rending groan, and a tremendous thud vibrated through the floorboards as a massive limb likely struck the roof or the side of the house. In the ensuing momentary silence between thunderclaps, a new sound emerged, a faint, splintering crack from the wall beside me, near the base of one of the integrated tree trunks. Lightning flashed again, illuminating a long, fresh fissure in the old wooden paneling, a section visibly dislodged by the house's violent shudder from the impact. Behind the splintered wood, where moments before there had been solid wall, there was now a dark, narrow gap, an opening into blackness, a hidden space, jolted into view by the storm's fury. My breath hitched. This was it. This was what they had been leading me towards. The air around the opening was frigid, and the scent of damp earth, old decay, and that faint, sorrowful perfume of violets was overwhelmingly strong, pouring out from the void. The whispers seemed to emanate directly from within, a chorus of urgent, pleading voices. Despite the palpable dread that prickled my skin, a compelling sense of destiny urged me forward. The storm had breached the house's defenses, and now a hidden secret lay exposed. Holding up my relit lantern, its flame trembling wildly, I cautiously approached the gap. The wood around it was splintered and damp. Peering inside, I saw a cramped, dark crawl space, barely tall enough to kneel in, the raw earth floor visible in places. Dust lay thick as velvet, disturbed only by whatever had caused the panel to break. It was undeniably a concealed compartment, a forgotten hollow within the house's ancient bones, promising answers, or perhaps even greater horrors. The storm roared its approval, or perhaps its warning. There was no question of turning back now. The combined force of the storm and the spectral urging was too powerful to resist. Taking a deep, steadying breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of my heart, I squeezed through the narrow, splintered opening. The wood scraped against my coat, a protesting shriek that was swallowed by a deafening roar of thunder. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, tasting of dust, decay, and the poignant, familiar scent of roses and violets, now almost overpoweringly, concentrated in this confined space. The crawl space was even smaller than it had appeared from the outside, forcing me to my hands and knees. My lantern cast dancing, grotesque shadows on the rough-hewn undersides of floorboards above and the packed earth below. Cobwebs, thick as funeral shrouds, brushed against my face. And the silence in here, a stark contrast to the raging storm outside, was somehow more terrifying. A breathless, expectant hush. The whispers, however, were clearer here, as if this was their sanctum. Their words still frustratingly indistinct, but filled with an undeniable urgency. I moved forward slowly, inch by inch, sweeping the lantern beam across the oppressive darkness. The space seemed to extend back further than I initially thought, a narrow tunnel burrowing deeper under the house, alongside the massive ancient tree root that formed one of its natural walls. The air grew colder, damper, the farther I ventured, and the feeling of being intensely watched, of being surrounded by unseen presences, was almost unbearable. I could feel their desperation, their need, pressing in on me from all sides. Then, my lantern beam fell upon something metallic, half buried in the dirt floor, near the gnarled surface of the tree root, brushing away the loose earth with trembling fingers. I unearthed a small, severely rusted tin box about the size of a book. It was dented, and its lid was fused shut with corrosion, clearly having lain here for a very long time, absorbing the dampness of the earth. Unlike Lily's wooden box, this one felt heavier, more substantial, and a different kind of chill emanated from it. Less of sorrow, more of a grim finality. A new wave of emotional energy washed over me as I touched the cold, rusted metal. Not the gentle sorrow of Eleanor, or the frightened grief of Lily, but a confusing surge of adult fear, of frantic haste, and a desperate desire to conceal. It was as if this box held secrets someone had been terrified to have discovered. The storm outside seemed to redouble its fury, the wind shrieking around the eaves like 1,000 mournful voices, urging me on, or perhaps warning me of what lay sealed within. The oppressive weight of fear and desperation emanating from the rusted tin box was almost a physical force, pushing against me. Yet the spectral chorus of whispers urged me on with an even greater intensity. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever lay within this container was a critical piece of the tragedy, a secret buried with fervent, terrified intent. The storm outside thundered its agreement, the wind shrieking through the splintered opening of the crawl space like a tormented soul. I had to know what it held, despite the palpable dread. With considerable effort, I worked my fingers beneath the box, the cold, rough metal biting into my skin. It was heavier than it looked, and wedged tightly in the damp earth as if the ground itself was reluctant to release its grim secret. As I finally pulled it free, a violent shiver ran through the very foundations of the house, a tremor that had nothing to do with the storm. The whispers in the crawl space rose to a frantic pitch, a cacophony of pleading and warning, swirling around me in the suffocating darkness. Clutching the cold, heavy box to my chest, I began to back out of the oppressive crawl space. As I emerged into the main body of the house, blinking against the erratic flashes of lightning that momentarily illuminated the hallway, a deafening crash of thunder exploded directly overhead. Simultaneously, every door on the ground floor slammed shut with violent force, plunging the hallway into an echoing, tomb-like silence, broken only by the roar of the continuing storm and my own ragged breathing. The intelligence was making its presence and its power undeniably known. The air crackled with an unseen energy. I stood frozen, the rusted box a cold, heavy weight in my arms. The spirits were not just guiding me anymore. They were reacting, responding with an almost terrifying force to the unearthing of this hidden object. It was a clear, unambiguous message. This box was pivotal. The fear it exuded felt like a residue of its last owner, a desperate attempt at concealment now breached, while the spirit's agitation felt like an equally desperate plea for its contents to finally be brought into the light. The storm raged on, a wild symphony of destruction and revelation. I was left standing in the dark, trembling hallway, surrounded by slammed doors, clutching a rusted box that pulsed with forgotten terrors and urgent secrets. The path to understanding what happened to Eleanor and Lily, and to the angry man, whose face I'd seen, clearly lay within its sealed confines. But as I felt the cold metal against my skin, I couldn't shake the ominous feeling that opening it would unleash far more than just memories. The fury of the great storm had finally begun to recede, leaving behind a world scoured and weeping. The thunder had rumbled off into the distance, and the rain had softened to a steady, melancholic drizzle, as if the sky itself were exhausted. Inside the house, an eerie calm had settled, yet the air remained thick with an electric anticipation, the aftermath of the violent manifestations and the profound significance of the rusted tin box I now held. Its cold, heavy presence was a stark reminder of the secrets it guarded, secrets the spirits were desperate for me to unearth. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes. Time felt distorted in the supercharged atmosphere, before I found the courage to confront what lay within the box. I sat at the sturdy wooden desk in the study, the one where I'd first read Anya's journal. Lily's tiny relics now placed carefully beside this new, more ominous find. With trembling hands and a collection of small tools I'd found in a kitchen drawer, a tarnished butter knife, a sturdy hairpin, I began to work at the fused lid of the rusted container. The metal shrieked in protest, flakes of rust crumbling, away under my persistent efforts. The spirits seemed to hold their breath. The whispers stilled. The cold spots receded, leaving only an almost unbearable sense of focused expectation. Finally, with a last wrenching groan, the lid gave way. My heart hammered against my ribs. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried, brittle leaves, lay a tightly bound packet of letters, their paper yellowed and stained, the ink faded but still visible. They were tied with a single, unraveling piece of dark blue ribbon. A wave of dizziness washed over me. These were the drowned memories, the core of the tragedy, preserved against all odds in their metallic tomb. The scent that arose from the box was not of roses or petrichor, but of old, damp paper, a faint, musty bitterness, and something else. A subtle, almost undetectable trace of salt water, like dried tears. I felt an immense weight of responsibility settle upon me. I was about to exhume a past that someone had tried with desperate finality to bury forever. Carefully, reverently, I lifted the fragile packet from the box. The paper was brittle, the edges softened and blurred by time and moisture. Some of the outer letters were almost illegible, the ink having bled into abstract, sorrowful patterns. The handwriting, where discernible, was a sloping, elegant script, different from Anya's more erratic scrawl. These were older, perhaps, or written by a different hand altogether. The rain outside picked up slightly, a soft, persistent drumming, as if nature itself was urging me to read, to give voice to these silenced words. With infinite care, I untied the faded blue ribbon, the silk almost disintegrating beneath my touch. I selected one of the more intact letters from the middle of the stack, its paper fragile as a dried leaf. The ink, a deep sepia, spoke of clandestine meetings under the great sentinel oak, the very tree whose roots cradled Lily's unearthed box, and of a love that was both exhilarating and terrifyingly forbidden, a love that defied an unseen, powerful family patriarch. The writer signed herself only as E, not Eleanor, yet the perfume of violets seemed to cling faintly to the page. As I read, the gentle drumming of the rain against the window pane seemed to grow more insistent, each drop a tiny pulse synchronizing with the rhythm of the archaic script. The words on the page, though faded, began to conjure vivid scenes in my mind, no longer just emotional echoes, but fully formed images. I saw a moonlit path, heard hushed laughter, felt the prickle of fear of discovery. It was as if the rain, the house's lifeblood, was breathing life back into these drowned memories, allowing me to witness them as they unfolded. One letter, its edges crumbling, spoke with raw anguish of a brother's cruel jealousy and a father's unyielding pride, painting a picture of a stern, unforgiving household where E's love was seen as a betrayal of duty and blood. The angry, contorted face I had seen, reflected in the window during the storm, flashed in my mind. This, then, was the source of that fury. The trees were mentioned often, as silent confidants, their ancient branches the only witnesses to stolen moments of happiness and whispered vows. My own heart ached in sympathy with E's plight, her joy, her fear, her defiance, and her dawning despair. They flowed from the faded ink directly into me, a torrent of shared experience. I was no longer just Alara, a curious observer in a haunted house. I was becoming a vessel for E's long, silent story, her emotions merging with mine until the boundary between us felt almost non-existent. The room grew colder, the scent of petrichor and roses swirling as if E herself stood beside me, guiding my eyes across her words. The narrative woven through the letters grew darker with each page. The forbidden love, once a source of trembling joy, became a catalyst for escalating family conflict. Accusations, threats, and a growing sense of entrapment filled the elegant, sloping script. The betrayal hinted at was not just of E by her family, but a deeper, more complex web of broken trusts and manipulations, all centered around her love and the child that was, I began to suspect, its innocent fruit, Lily. The letters, painted a harrowing picture. E ostracized, her beloved spoken of as a villain, and little Lily, the innocent offspring of this unsanctioned love, regarded as a shameful secret by the stern patriarch and the jealous brother. There were desperate pleas for understanding, for forgiveness, addressed to a mother who seemed too cowed by her husband to offer any support. The betrayal was multifaceted, a slow, agonizing suffocation of E's spirit within the oppressive confines of her own family and this very house, her only solace the child and the silent, listening trees. I was so absorbed in the unfolding tragedy, the faded ink a conduit to such profound sorrow, that I didn't hear the telltale crunch of tires on the gravel outside. It was only when a sharp rap echoed on the front door, a sound eerily reminiscent of Miss Thorne's previous arrival, that I was jolted back to the present. My heart sank. The timing felt too coincidental, almost predatory, as if she sensed I was nearing the heart of the secret she seemed so determined to control or discredit. Reluctantly, I left the letters spread on the desk and went to the door. Indeed, it was Millicent Thorne, her expression even more severe than before, her eyes like chips of ice. "I thought I might find you engrossed," she said, her gaze flicking meaningfully towards the study, as if she could see through walls. I neglected to share a rather pertinent detail during my last visit, a piece of family history directly concerning the reliability of personal correspondence found on this property. She stepped inside uninvited, her presence instantly making the air feel colder, the scent of Eleanor's roses seeming to wither. Eleanor, your E, I presume, was known for her vivid imagination, Miss Vance. Her father and brother were not without their sternness, true, but her accounts of their cruelty were often embellished. She had a flair for the dramatic, a tendency to cast herself as the tragic heroine. Those letters you found? They are likely more fiction than fact, a heartbroken woman's attempt to rewrite her own failings. Her words were a calculated assault on the truth I felt blooming from the pages. Miss Thorne was actively trying to dismantle Eleanor's credibility, to paint her as an unreliable narrator of her own life. This, then, was her true color. Not a historian seeking objective truth, but a guardian of a particular narrative, one that perhaps shielded the family name from the ugliness of its past. The rain-animated memories I'd witnessed, Eleanor's raw emotion, seemed to cry out in protest against this cold, cynical dismissal. "How can you be so sure?" I challenged, my voice low but steady, fueled by the vivid emotions that had coursed through me, the palpable grief that still clung to the air. The sorrow in this house, the fear. It's too real, too profound to be mere theatrics. I've felt it. Ms. Thorne's lips thinned. Feelings can be deceptive, Miss Vance, especially in a place so saturated with atmosphere. Historical accounts, documented evidence, these are the things that endure. Eleanor's family were pillars of this community. Her fanciful tales served only to distress them. She then played her final card, pulling a small, formally written note from her file. "This is a copy of a physician's letter from that time," she stated, her voice crisp. "It speaks of Eleanor's nervous disposition, her melancholic fantasies. It suggests that for her own well-being, and that of the child, a certain firm guidance was necessary." She placed it on the table beside the letters, a stark, clinical counterpoint to Eleanor's passionate, despairing words. It was a calculated move, designed to pathologize Eleanor, to strip her of all credibility. As Ms. Thorne's chilling words hung in the air, my gaze fell upon the open letters on the desk. The faint scent of violets and petrichor seemed to intensify, swirling around me like a protective embrace. Suddenly, the elegant script on one particular page seemed to shimmer, the faded ink almost glowing. A vivid image flooded my mind. Eleanor, her face pale and tear-streaked but resolute, frantically writing at this very desk, the great sentinel oak visible through the window, its branches thrashing in a storm, while the sound of a heavy, angry fist pounded on the locked study door. The vision was so potent, so immediate, I could almost feel the vibrations of that furious pounding, hear Eleanor's whispered prayers for strength, for her child's safety. It was a moment of desperate courage, not of melancholic fantasy or dramatic inclination. It was the raw terror of a woman trapped, trying to preserve her truth, her love, against an oppressive, unyielding force. This was not a performance. This was a testament, written in the face of imminent silencing. Ms. Thorne left soon after, her mission of doubt seemingly accomplished in her own mind. But she had failed. The physician's note lay on the table, a cold, sterile artifact, but it was Eleanor's voice, animated by the house's sorrowful magic that resonated within me. The true colors I had seen were not Eleanor's supposed instability, but Miss Thorne's own determined effort to uphold a sanitized, perhaps self-serving version of the past. My path was clearer now. I had to give Eleanor her voice, to uncover the full extent of the betrayal she and Lily had endured beneath the silent, watching trees. In the deceptive calm that followed Miss Thorne's departure, I devoted myself entirely to Eleanor's letters, the physician's cold note cast aside, ignored. I spread them across the study desk, arranging them chronologically as best I could, searching for the final pieces of her fractured story. The air was heavy, humid, pregnant with an unspoken anticipation. Outside, the sky, which had offered a brief respite, began to darken ominously once more, a deep, bruised purple hue spreading from the west, promising a tempest that would dwarf all previous onslaughts. This felt like the culmination, the final act, and what an act it was. The storm, when it arrived, was not merely a downpour or a gale. It was a biblical deluge, a raging flood from the heavens. Rain fell in solid, blinding sheets, erasing the world beyond the windows. Wind, possessed of a demonic fury, tore at the ancient trees, their tortured creaks and groans sounding like the death cries of giants. The house itself became an embattled fortress, shuddering and vibrating with each fresh assault, the timbers groaning as if their very sinews were being ripped apart. Amidst this elemental chaos, I hunched over the letters, my focus a fragile shield against the terror. The rain hammering. On the roof was a deafening drumbeat, urging me on. Eleanor's later entries were increasingly frantic, filled with a palpable dread. She wrote of being a prisoner in her own home, of her beloved being banished, her child, Lily, threatened. The angry man, her brother, loomed large in these final pages, his jealousy and ambition poisoning their father's heart against her, his threats becoming more overt. The sheer violence of the storm seemed to infuse the house with a terrifying energy. The spectral manifestations reached a fever pitch. Not just whispers now, but wails of despair, angry shouts echoing the past, and the distinct, chilling sound of a child, Lily, crying out in fear. Objects were not merely rattling, but were flung from shelves by unseen forces. The house felt like it was tearing itself apart, physically and psychically, as the truth strained to be born amidst the tempest's rage. Then, in a letter stained with what looked chillingly like a teardrop, that had blurred the ink, Eleanor described a desperate final plan. She spoke of entrusting her most precious treasure, her collected letters, proof of her love and her suffering, to the roots of the great oak, hoping that one day, truth, like a resilient seed, might find its way to the light. She mentioned a small, hidden space beneath the house, accessible from the outside if one knew where to look. A place of childhood games now repurposed for this desperate act of preservation. My blood ran cold. The hidden space, the rusted tin box, I had already found it, guided by the storm and the spirits themselves. Eleanor's desperate act of preservation had succeeded, her voice reaching out across the decades. The storm shrieked outside, a keening lament, as if underscoring the tragedy of her foresight. The final letters in the packet, I now realized with dawning horror, must contain the culmination of her story. The unpleasantness Mr. Hemlock had so carefully avoided, the truth Miss Thorne had tried to obliterate. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the very last letter, its paper so fragile it threatened to crumble into dust. The script was hurried, blotched with what could have been rain, or tears, or both. It spoke of a final, brutal confrontation with her brother, his eyes filled with a chilling, possessive rage. He had discovered her plans to flee with Lily and her beloved. He had locked them in, a raging storm, much like this one, battering the house, isolating them completely with their tormentor, his threats escalating to a terrifying crescendo. Then, the horrifying truth, stark and brutal. "He will not let us leave," Eleanor wrote, her words a desperate scrawl. "He speaks of the tainted bloodline, of the shame we bring. He says the trees themselves demand a cleansing, that the roots of this house must drink deep of our sorrow to purify the family name. He looks at Lily with such coldness. I fear he sees her not as a child, but as an aberration to be pruned away. We are trapped. The ancient oak outside my window feels less like a confidant now, and more like a gallows." My gasp was lost in a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to split the sky. The implication was monstrous. No illness, no accident. This was a deliberate act of cruelty, a murder veiled in righteousness, a sacrifice to family pride and twisted ambition. Eleanor and Lily, their spirits bound to this house, to the very wood and water that had witnessed their end, not just by sorrow, but by an unforgivable act of violence. The house, the trees, they weren't just witnesses. They had become their tomb, their prison. The storm reached its zenith, a chaotic symphony of destruction. Rain lashed the windows with the force of thrown stones, and the wind tore at the house. With such malevolence, I feared it would be ripped from its foundations. As if in response to my understanding, the spectral wails within the house converged into a single unified cry of profound agony and desperate longing, a sound that pierced through the storm's roar. The full, terrible secret was finally revealed, and its weight felt crushing, unbearable. The raw, unadulterated horror of Eleanor's final words, and the gut-wrenching understanding of what had befallen her and Lily, left me paralyzed, adrift in a sea of their agony. The storm outside was a physical manifestation of the violence they had endured, the house itself a resonating chamber of their unending torment. That unified cry I had heard from them now echoed with a new, desperate clarity. It was a plea, not just for acknowledgement, but for release, for justice, for an end to their suffering bound to this cursed place. As the house shuddered under a particularly vicious gust, threatening to buckle, the stark reality of my own situation crashed down. Escape. The word screamed in my mind. I could flee this house of horrors, abandon these tormented spirits to their fate, save myself from the crushing weight of their tragedy and the palpable danger that seemed to cling to these woods, these walls. The storm itself felt like an expulsion, nature trying to purge the land of this awful secret, and perhaps me along with it. But how could I leave them now? Knowing what I knew, feeling what I felt. Little Lily's fear, Eleanor's desperate, love and ultimate betrayal. To turn my back would be another abandonment, another silencing of their truth. Then there was the option of exposing what had happened, of dragging this dark family secret into the light. But Miss Thorne's calculated visit, her determination to discredit Eleanor, proved there were forces actively working to keep this buried. My word, against theirs, would be a fragile weapon. What then? Appease them? How does one appease spirits, bound by such profound injustice and violence? The letters, though detailing their suffering, offered no explicit instructions for their peace. I looked at the small wrapped bundle containing Lily's relics, at Eleanor's scattered tear-stained letters. Their grief was a palpable entity in the room, their longing a cold ache in my own chest. The rain sluiced down the window panes like an endless flood of tears, the wind a constant, mournful sigh. Suddenly, amidst the storm's cacophony and the spirit's sorrowful laments, a new sound emerged from within the house. A faint, rhythmic creaking, almost like a lullaby, coming from the direction of the main staircase. It was a sound I hadn't heard with such clarity before, and it seemed to cut through the chaos with a chilling precision. The spectral cries momentarily softened, replaced by an expectant hush, as if they too were listening, guiding my attention towards this new, subtle summons from the heart of the battered house. The rhythmic creaking from the staircase was a fragile thread of sound in the storm's dying symphony, yet it pulled at me with an undeniable force. Escape was a fleeting, cowardly thought. Exposing the truth to a disbelieving world felt insurmountable, right now. But this sound, this specific guidance from Eleanor and Lily, felt like an invitation, a clue to what they truly needed from me. With a newfound, albeit terrifying resolve, I moved towards the grand shadowed staircase in the main hall, the source of that haunting, rhythmic sound. As I drew closer, the air around the staircase grew intensely cold, and the combined scent of roses, violets, and damp earth was almost suffocating. The creaking pinpointed one specific step, about halfway up the ascent. Visually, it looked no different from the others, yet it was from this single tread that the sound emanated, a slow, sorrowful rock, as if an invisible footfall perpetually tested its strength. The spectral presence of Eleanor and Lily felt incredibly strong here, their emotions a torrent of grief, fear, and a desperate, pleading hope. Guided by an instinct I couldn't explain, I knelt and ran my hands along the underside of the creaking step. The wood was old, scored, and damp. Then, my fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible irregularity. A tiny, recessed latch. My breath hitched. The storm outside chose that moment to offer a final, defiant roar of thunder, rattling the very house, and then profound, almost unearthly quiet began to descend as the rain softened to a whisper. With trembling fingers, I pressed the latch. The front of the wooden step didn't fall away, as I might have expected. Instead, the entire tread loosened, and with a gentle pull, it lifted like the lid of a narrow, dark coffer. Inside, nestled within the shallow, hollowed-out space, lay not bones, nor a weapon, but a small, exquisitely embroidered child sampler, bearing the name Lily, stitched in faded blue silk, surrounded by intertwined roses and violets. Beside it, carefully placed, was a single, withered white rose, its petals now brown and brittle with age, a token of love, or perhaps of mourning. Tears streamed down my face as I lifted the sampler. This was it. This was their final hidden testament, not of violence, but of enduring love and identity, concealed within the very structure of their prison. The choice became clear, not as an act of grand exposure to a hostile world, nor a desperate flight, but a quiet, personal act of remembrance and restoration. I had to bring these tokens, Lily's name and her mother's love, out of the darkness, to give them the acknowledgement, the peace they had been denied for so long. The house and the spirits within seemed to exhale a collective, sorrowful sigh of dawning release. Dawn broke through the tattered remnants of the storm clouds, casting a pale, watery light into the battered house. The rain had finally, truly subsided, leaving only the soft, rhythmic dripping from the eaves and the sodden leaves, a gentle weeping that felt more like a release than a sorrow. A profound quietude filled the air, an exhaustion that mirrored my own, yet beneath it lay a fragile, tentative sense of peace, as if the house itself had exhaled a long-held, painful breath. Lily's sampler and the withered rose lay on the desk, silent, poignant testaments. My chosen path was not one of dramatic pronouncements to an unbelieving world, but a quiet honoring within these walls that had held so much pain. I took Eleanor's, letters, Lily's tiny wooden bird and her tarnished brass locket, and the newly found sampler and rose, and carried them to the main living room. There, upon the old stone mantelpiece, which had once held only my own few belongings and Anya's locket, I carefully arranged these precious relics, creating a small, sacred space of remembrance for Eleanor and her beloved child. As I stepped back, a soft warmth seemed to permeate the room, a gentle caress against my skin. The oppressive cold spots that had haunted my periphery were gone. The insistent whispers that had plagued my waking hours had faded into a profound, unbroken silence. Even the pervasive sense of petrichor and sorrowful perfume had receded, leaving only the clean, earthy smell of damp wood and the lingering, delicate fragrance of the withered rose, now more a memory than a presence. The house felt different, undeniably so. The oppressive weight that had clung to its atmosphere since my arrival had lifted, as if a great burden had been set down. It was still old, still bearing the scars of its long, isolated existence and the recent storm, but the palpable sense of anguish, of a tragedy endlessly replaying itself, was gone. The light, though still filtered by the dense canopy of trees, seemed to fall with a softer, more benign grace through the rain-washed windows, and I too was changed. The solitude I had initially sought had been stripped away, replaced by an intimacy with lives long past, with sorrows not my own yet deeply felt. The experience had hollowed me out, yet filled me with a strange, quiet strength, a profound understanding of the enduring power of love, loss, and remembrance. The terrors had been very real, but so too had been the connection, the trust placed in me by spirits desperate for their truth to be known, for their love to be acknowledged. In the days that followed, I moved through the house with a newfound sense of calm, yet with an acute awareness of its subtle shifts. I revisited the crawl space, now just a dark, empty hollow. The rusted tin box, and its sorrowful contents removed from its earthy grip. The staircase no longer creaked with that rhythmic, mournful sound. It was just old wood settling. The water stains on the walls, though still visible, seemed static now, their eerie calligraphy no longer shifting, their stories seemingly told, or at least acknowledged. I thought of Mr. Hemlock, his gentle warnings and sad knowing. I thought of Ms. Thorne, her sharp cynicism and her desire to curate the past. I felt no need to confront either of them, no desire to present my findings or justify my actions. Their truths, or versions of truth, belonged to them. I had found the one that resonated with the house, with the spirits of Eleanor and Lily, and that was enough. The small shrine on the mantelpiece was a quiet testament, needing no external validation, yet the echoes remained, as I knew they would. Sometimes a faint, almost imagined scent of violets would drift through a room, even when the windows were closed. Occasionally, in the quiet of the afternoon, I would hear a sound like the softest sigh. Not of sorrow anymore, but perhaps of remembrance. The puddles that formed after a light shower no longer reflected anguished faces, but they held the sky with a deeper, more somber hue, as if forever tinged by the tears they had once mirrored. My planned hermitage had become something far more profound. I knew I would not stay here indefinitely. The intensity of the experience, though faded, had left its indelible mark. But I wouldn't flee either. I would see out my intended time. A quiet guardian of the peace I had helped to broker. This house, once a symbol of my desire for escape from my own life, had instead plunged me into the very heart of others, forging an unexpected, unbreakable bond. The house under the trees would indeed never be just a house again, not for me. It was a place of deep sorrow, but also of enduring love, a testament to the voices that linger in forgotten places, waiting for a listening heart. The secrets, once touched by the rain, by the storm's fury, had been brought into a fragile light, and even in the brightest sunshine, their echoes would forever whisper through its rooms, through the rustling leaves of the ancient, watching trees. The peace that settled was not an absence of memory, but a gentle cradling of it. The appeasement, I realized, hadn't required an elaborate ritual or a dramatic confrontation with the darker forces of the past. It had simply needed a willingness to listen, to acknowledge the truth of their suffering, and to honor their love and their identities. Eleanor and Lily hadn't sought vengeance, only remembrance, a quiet validation of their stolen lives, a space where their story could finally rest, undisturbed by malice or disbelief. I found myself spending more time near the ancient sentinel, oak, the one that had featured so prominently in Eleanor's letters, and the terrifying reflections. Its massive branches, though battered by the recent storms, still reached protectively over the house. It no longer felt like a gallows or a menacing witness, but rather a silent ancient guardian that had held their secrets, and now, perhaps, shared in the fragile peace. Its rustling leaves in the gentle breeze sounded less like whispers of sorrow and more like a soft, ongoing lullaby. The connection I felt to Eleanor and Lily didn't vanish with the overt manifestations. It had transformed into something quieter, a tender ache in my heart, a profound empathy that wove their story into the fabric of my own. Sometimes, I would find myself speaking to them in my thoughts, sharing a moment of beauty in the garden, or the quiet satisfaction of a cup of tea by the fire, as if they were cherished friends whose presence I could still keenly feel, a comforting warmth rather than a chilling dread. I began to write, not for an audience, but for myself, for them. I chronicled everything. My arrival, the unsettling whispers, the cryptic journal, the shifting stains, the terrifying reflections, the unearthing of their relics, and the final, heartbreaking truth within the letters. It was my own act of bearing witness, of ensuring their story, as I had come to understand it, would not be lost or distorted again. A private testament to the courage and endurance of their spirits, a final gift of voice. When the rain came now, as it often did in these deep woods, it was different. It no longer felt like a catalyst for terror or a summons to spectral torment. Instead, it was a gentle cleansing, a soft murmur that seemed to underscore the quietude that had finally settled over the house under the trees. Each drop felt like a reminder of the tears shed, the sorrows endured, but also of the resilience, of memory and the possibility of peace, however long delayed, however hard won. The day will eventually come when my arranged time in this secluded haven draws to a close, and the thought of leaving the house under the trees now brings a quiet pang. It is no longer a place I inhabit with trepidation, but one I share with the gentle spirits of Eleanor and Lily, a sanctuary of understood sorrow and hard-won peace. The dense woods, the ancient oaks, the very timbers of the house feel less like a confining wilderness and more like the protective embrace of an old wise friend who has shared its deepest secrets. Before that time comes, I often find myself simply sitting with them, the small shrine on the mantel a focal point for my quiet contemplations. Sometimes I'll read aloud from a book of poetry, or describe the changing light in the forest, small offerings of companionship. There's no need for grand gestures anymore, just the shared breath of existence, a silent acknowledgement of the lives that touched mine so profoundly, bridging the vast, silent expanse of time and loss with a thread of human empathy. The echoes, I know, will always remain here, woven into the very fabric of the house, into the sigh of the wind through the canopy, into the scent of the earth after rain. Future. Storms may pass. Future inhabitants may come and go, perhaps oblivious to the profound drama that once played out within these walls. But for those with a listening heart, a sensitivity to the unseen, Eleanor and Lily will still be here. Their story a gentle whisper, no longer a cry of pain, but a soft, enduring murmur of presence. This house, these woods, have taught me that the past is never truly past. It lives on in the places that held it, in the objects that absorbed its joys and sorrows, and in the hearts of those who are willing to bear witness. I carry Eleanor and Lily with me now, not as a burden, but as a quiet reminder of the strength found in vulnerability, the courage it takes to face unspeakable truths, and the healing power of simple, heartfelt acknowledgement. My own life feels immeasurably deeper, more attuned to the subtle frequencies of the world. And so, the house under the trees stands, a silent sentinel in the deep woods. The rain may fall, stirring the faintest scent of violets and roses, a whisper of petrichor from the damp earth, but it will no longer be a summons to terror. It will be a gentle reminder, a soft underscoring of lives lived, love cherished, and a peace finally found. The secrets are at rest, cradled by the ancient trees, held in the quiet heart of a house that will forever echo with their story. A story I was privileged to uncover and privileged to share. The rains fall softer now, a silver sigh upon the ancient slates, the listening eaves. No longer do they weep a history, nor claw with spectral grief at shuttered leaves. The house breathes low, a quiet, steady heart, its timbers holding peace where sorrow dwelled. The wounds I witnessed, slowly set apart, a story whispered, finally unspelled. The sentinel oak, its boughs against the blue, still stands a watch, though what it guards has changed. Its roots run deep, where hidden anguish grew, now cradling, silence tenderly arranged, and in its shade I sometimes think I see a flicker, sunlight, or a child's brief smile. A mother's grace, where shadows used to be, content to rest and linger for a while. The scents remain, a phantom trace of rose, of violet dew on morning's gentle air, the sweet, clean earth when a soft shower goes, faint echoes of the love that conquered despair. These are not ghosts that chill or bind or plead, but rather perfumes of a time reset, a garden unseen, grown from sorrow's seed, where memory blooms, and I do not forget. For in this quiet, in this aftermath, the house, the trees, and I are intertwined. I walk a gentler, more enlightened path, the whispers of their peace within my mind, and know that when I leave this hallowed ground, a part of them will journey on with me, a silent song, where solace can be found beneath the eaves of my own memory.